Order, order. Sarah Champion to move the motion, please.
I beg to move that this House has considered the impact of extended producer responsibility for packaging on glass packaging producers, and it is a great pleasure to serve under your chairship, Mr Stringer. In the UK, the glass manufacturing sector supports over 120,000 jobs, adding 2.2 billion to the economy each year. I'm immensely proud to have Beats & Clark in my constituency, which has been manufacturing glass in Rotherham for more than 270 years. It is a key local employer and the only remaining independent UK-owned glass container manufacturer. They are also the only company in the UK who still produce amber pharmaceutical glass. When you add that in the supply chain, 2,000 people are dependent on Beats & Clark for their livelihood. As we move to a fully circular economy, glass is the perfect packaging material. It's infinitely recyclable, does not lose quality over time, and does not release harmful microplastics into products, including the human body or the environment at large. It's easily and widely recyclable, with no degradation as part of the recycling process. Bottle banks were first introduced in the UK in the 1970s, and glass that was collected then is most likely still in circulation today. Glass manufacturing is energy intensive, but with electric and hybrid furnaces a readily available technology, there is no reason why glass cannot be net zero product in the not too distant future, especially with the government's support in terms of infrastructure and electricity costs, as per the Climate Change Committee's recommendations. Yet, because of the government's dogged decision to press ahead with extended producer responsibility initiated by the previous administration, we instead face the decimation of our domestic glass industry. Job losses and the closure of sites are literally just around the corner. This is not the industry overreacting. British Glass have already received warnings from more than one beer and cider manufacturer that there is no future for glass in this country due to the EPR policy. EPR follows hot on the heels of a challenging few years for UK glass manufacturing. The energy crisis, increased costs, and a reduction in trade tariffs from 6% to 0% since leaving the EU have made much cheaper imported glass so much more attractive. I will, of course.
Thank you for giving way. Holden's Bottle Company, my constituency, has written to me on the concerns of EPR, making the company simply uncompetitive. Does my right honourable friend agree that EPR fees, if they were calculated on volume, not on weight, that this would incentivise using more sustainable material like glass over plastic?
I 100% support her in this. It's crazy that we're not doing it on volume because, of course, glass is heavier. And what's happening is we're forcing people to move to lighter products, particularly plastic.
Would my right honourable friend give way?
I will.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. But would she also accept that because a glass is heavier than other products, it therefore costs more to recycle, it costs more to transport, it may break during transport, and therefore it's actually not the case that it is a more sustainable product?
I haven't heard that, and I haven't seen any evidence to that. I mean, all I can say is in Wales, 95% of the glass is curbside collected and recycled. So I don't actually know where those stats are coming from. And if she wants to share them, not just with me, but with the industry, of course I'd want to have a look at that.
Happy to do that.
Glass produced in Turkey is not currently covered by emissions trading, and therefore the CO2 emitted is not captured by matching penalties. In addition, Turkish glass manufacturers have been building factories in organised industrial zones, as a result of which government support in the form of lower water, natural gas or telecommunications costs, as well as the lower taxation scheme. These are all things Turkish glass benefit from. The lower cost base supported by the Turkish government in the form of state aid is assisting Turkey in targeting export prices at lower than UK factory costs. But it is the baseline fees set for glass under the extended producer responsibility that are set to be the hammer blow. And that hammer is being wielded by by a Labour government. I find that hugely disappointing. I will, of course, give way.
I want to put on record my pride in having a glassworks in Irvine in my constituency and its many workers, including Mr Thompson, who lived next door to me in Auchenharvey Place when I was growing up. The government must consider the concerns of the sector about the EPR and look at the evidence that's been supplied, and I urge the Minister to adopt the sensible solutions my friend is suggesting today.
Thank you so much. The glass sector has always supported the principle behind EPR. It lobbied on sound environmental and safety grounds against inclusion in the deposit return scheme, knowing and accepting this would mean the inclusion of all glass products in EPR. Yet the terms of EPR have seemingly been deliberately stacked against them. It's not just glass manufacturers who will be hit hard by this. Indeed, since being granted this debate, I have been literally inundated with messages from organisations worried about the impact of EPR.
Give way.
I will.
Thank you for giving way. And does she agree that it's important to ensure that the implementation of EPR would avoid unintended consequences for sectors like pubs, which are already facing huge headwinds and in many cases manage their packaging waste through commercial contracts already, so would in fact be facing sort of double the levy?
My honourable friend makes the sound point, and I will reinforce that. And let me go through some, and I say some, of the organisations that have been in touch with me over this. They include Vinarchy, one of the world's largest wine companies, the Society of Independent Brewers and Associates, CAMRA, the British Beer and Pub Association, the Wine and Spirits Trade Association and UK Hospitality, the Food Services Packaging Association, the Metal Packaging Association, both Scottish and Irish Whisky Associations, the English Whisky Guild, the Brewing, Food and Beverage Industry Suppliers Association, the National Association of Cider Makers and Wine GB. They have all spoken out against EPR. Their criticisms of the approach being taken by the government have been surprisingly, strikingly similar. Minister, they can't all be wrong. Other assessments of EPR plans have been similarly damning. The Office of Budget Responsibility has concluded that EPR is a tax. It will not improve recycling rates and it will damage businesses. The Bank of England and the British Retail Consortium have recently stated that the impact of this policy on businesses will be similar to that of the increased national insurance costs. As my honourable friend said, all at a time of rising economic uncertainty resulting from the Trump's tariffs. Pubs are facing an estimated £8 million hike in their costs, or an extra £2,000 per year for a large pub. I will give way.
Thank the Honourable Lady for giving way and for securing this debate, because I also heard from the British Beer and Pub Association and several of the local pubs in my constituency of West Dorset. The British Beer and Pub Association said the increase per bottle on beer and cider was between 5 and 7 pence. This comes on the back of increases in business rates that saw one of my pubs, the George in West Bay, see their business rates go from £8,000 to £27,000 a year, and national insurance contributions on top of that. If we want to keep village pubs, we need to support them and not keep taxing them.
100%, and it is these, one hopes, unintended consequences that are the stark evidence that have been put to the Minister, and it's seemingly not making any difference. And I go back to the point that my honourable friend from St Ursula and Newquay made. EPR is intended to apply only to household waste, and as pubs and businesses already pay for their packaging waste collection via commercial contracts, it means that they're being charged double. I will give way.
I was very grateful. She's making an excellent speech. She's pointing out about the double counting and the effect of EPR. But it's also the case, I've got 90 pubs and Fuller's Brewery in my constituency, and they employ about 4,000 people. And with all the other pressures that are on pubs and the hospitality industry at the moment, this is just a bridge too far. And isn't it something that we do need to look at again, and the government does need to reconsider?
I completely agree with him, and the government needs to pause, and I'll go on to make the arguments of why it needs to pause, because one of the problems, as my friend rightly identifies, is the packaging producers are unable to exclude these products from their EPR liability. There is no way out for the pubs, for the hospitality, other than to pay this. The Wine and Spirit Trade Association has said, and I quote if I may, Mr Stringer, DEFRA's new rules do not work, and the vast majority of bottles sold in hospitality will pay EPR fees completely unfairly. DEFRA are aware of their mistake, but have admitted this issue would not be prioritised. Why? For brewers, the cost of glass beer bottle packaging is estimated to be over 150 million per year. These additional costs will ultimately be passed on to the consumers. The government itself estimates that 85% of EPR costs will fall on the end user. With the public already facing stubbornly high costs of living and inflationary pressure, I cannot comprehend why DEFRA is proceeding with a policy that its own analysis suggests may not be meaningful to improve recycling rates. I urge the Minister to change course. Step away from this madness. Let us look in detail at this flawed scheme. The exact methodology for calculating EPR has still not been fully shared, even though it came into effect last month. The process to date has been far from transparent. Based on current illustrative fees, glass is liable for around 30% of EPR costs, whilst only representing around 5% of in-scope material by volume. This is because fees are calculated by weight, not by volume. Glass is a relatively heavy material, therefore suffers unfairly because of this. Yet it is volume that is the limiting factor when collecting and processing waste, not weight. British Glass has raised several areas they believe are incorrect with the methodology for calculating the base fees, but have received no certainty from DEFRA that these will be reflected in the final fees. I'm aware that other packaging trade associations have also serious concerns about the methodology used to create the base fees. The fee for glass currently stands at £240 per tonne, which equates to around 10p per glass bottle, significantly higher than under similar schemes in Europe. Germany is often cited, included by DEFRA, as a good example of a successful EPR scheme. In Germany, the fee stands at €24.28 per tonne of glass. I appreciate that collection methods are different in Europe, so the comparison is not exact, but are we seriously expected to believe it costs 10 times as much in the UK to collect and process glass than it does in Germany? The policy makes even less sense when you consider that brands and retailers don't buy packaging by weight, they buy it by unit. That is why it is essential to have an EPR fee that takes into account the unit numbers. Recyclable glass can be 20 times heavier than less recyclable packaging, resulting in vastly disproportionate EPR fees on glass. When I raised these issues previously, the Minister acknowledged that the per-unit impact on glass is higher than for other materials. Yet the government has failed to address this, calling into question the government's repeated claim that the policy is materially neutral. That is simply not true. Glass is being penalised. The implementation of EPR leaves glass at the mercy of its competitors. Glass beverages containers have been subjected to EPR fees since the start of this April. Competing materials like aluminium and plastic will face no policy fees until the introduction of DRS in, at the earliest, October 27. In the meantime, I won't at the moment. In the meantime, our government is driving packaging customers to move decisively, permanently away from glass. If, for example, a brand sells 1 million half-litre bottles, the EPR fees for glass would be £72,000. If, on the other hand, they decide to put their product into plastic or aluminium, they will pay no EPR fees whatsoever. Officials and ministers have argued that materials are part of a DRS that would be subject to set-up costs. and that it is on these grounds that they are granted exemption from EPR fees for close to 2.5 years. Yet these set-up costs are still unknown publicly and therefore cannot and have not been considered by brands and retailers when deciding on their packaging choices. The truth is that brands and retailers can avoid paying the imminent threat of additional costs from EPR by switching away from glass packaging and avoiding paying EPR fees for their beverage products. Once these producers have decided to switch packaging materials, they must invest in new filling technology that makes it highly unlikely that they will ever switch back to glass. Minister, this is not a hypothetical problem. The glass industry is already seeing evidence of material switching to less recyclable packaging. Indeed, I know that DEFRA has been sent a great deal of evidence of material switching. But let us be honest, this policy choice does not seem to be based on evidence, but to be quite honest with the room, on some unfathomable ideology. In public, In public and in response to correspondence, DEFRA stated that there is no evidence of material switch or not enough evidence. This is simply not true. The industry, my business, the sectors affected have supplied that evidence. And I start to wonder, is there actually any threshold of evidence that would result in a rethink on this? Modulation of future EPR fees has also been highlighted by DEFRA to address these expansive concerns. But let's be honest, even at the earliest point this will be introduced, huge and likely terminal damage will already have been done to the glass manufacturers. It is not clear under the current guidelines that glass will receive a reduction in fees, and it could even result in an increase in future. But as fees are currently charged retrospectively, and given the lack of confirmed information on the level of fees glass will face, these costs are essentially unrecoverable. How can businesses be expected to operate under this profound uncertainty about their current and future costs? Similarly, reuse is often indicated by DEFRA to represent a magic bullet that will address all of the concerns, if only the industry would just get on board. The glass sector is keen to be part of the development of reuse, and glass is the perfect material to allow for it. But we must accept that large-scale national reuse systems are at least a decade away, as there is currently no reuse infrastructure. Furthermore, not all products are suitable for reuse. Glass manufacturers can already supply reusable bottles, but a reuse scheme is much more than just the supply of the reuse bottles. It would require significant buy-in across the whole supply chain. The Minister also needs to recognise that not all glass bottles are for drinks. Beatson Clark in my constituency manufactures medicine bottles. Reuse is a laudable goal, and one that the glass industry is keen to work in collaboration with government to achieve. But it is being repeatedly deployed as a grounds to ignore the concerns of the industry on EPR. These are two very separate issues, and the conflation seems to be deliberate to muddy the issue. The short-term impact of EPR could destroy the UK glass industry long before plans for reuse are even on the drawing board. It has also been cited by DEFRA that the recycling reforms will add at least 21,000 new jobs, £10 billion to the UK economy, and stimulate the growth on which the government is so rightly focused. Yet it's unclear how these new jobs will be created. They're also unlikely to be wealth-generating jobs that we currently have in the glass sector. And let's be honest, those jobs are in our manufacturing heartland that really needs that work. Even if the Minister's prediction was true, why risk existing jobs? Why not take the time to get EPR right and have both? Minister, this is not scaremongering. The glass packaging industry is being driven into crisis directly because of the government's making. UK glass manufacturers are already reporting that demand is down by 20%. It's only been in place for a month, and low-cost imports have increased as they will be able to absorb the EPR costs. On paper, I get the government is ostensibly seeking to encourage recycling while recovering the cost to the public purse of its delivery. This is the right objective, but your approach will achieve the exact opposite. It will encourage switching to less recyclable materials. It will add costs to businesses like pubs and breweries already struggling under inflationary and other cost pressures. And it will see an increase in prices for consumers. If the concerns of industry are not addressed today, you also risk destroying our domestic capacity, leaving us reliant upon highly polluting foreign imports. I've raised these issues with the Minister time and time again. I know colleagues have. I know British Glass has. I know individual businesses have. I cannot therefore understand the reticence that has been shown to engage with these very real problems. The origins of EPR lie with the previous administration, but by continuing this flawed and ultimately self-defeating approach, a Labour government risks destroying a great British industry. Does the Minister really want to be responsible for killing off our most recycling packaging producer? Thank you.
Thank you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Thank you. Members of Stirrup, we've got approximately 39 minutes before I call the front bench spokespeople and 8 people, so that's, if some people speak for slightly less time, it's 5 minutes. So if honourable members speak to time or slightly less, I will impose a 5-minute limit on speeches. If there are interventions, obviously I'll have to reduce the time as we go through. The question is that this House has considered the impact of extended producer responsibility for packaging on glass packaging producers. Helen Morgan.
It's a privilege to serve with you in the chair, and also thank you to the member for Rotherham for opening this debate, bringing this debate and opening it with such a comprehensive description of the issues that the industry is facing. I congratulate her for that. I must start by declaring an interest because my husband works for a wine merchant and is its finance director. So I do have an interest, and I can also assure you that I have been had the impact of this described on the wine industry to me on many occasions. Such great concern is it causing to the industry. Now, North Shropshire has a number of excellent breweries in addition to wine merchants, including Jules, Stonehouse and Salopian breweries. And in fact, Salopian had one of its excellent products, Shropshire Gold, in Strangers Bar 2 weeks ago. So I hope everybody's had an opportunity to sample that. And the pubs that they supply are at the heart of our rural communities and fundamental to both village and market town life. But the hospitality and drinks industry is facing a number of headwinds, and the EPR scheme threatens to have a devastating effect on them. We recognise that the principle of applying a levy to these products to encourage producers to reduce their amount of packaging and reduce unnecessary packaging is an absolutely sound one. But I think the EPR scheme has significant concerns and causes a significant issue for the industry.
On that point, will she give way?
I will give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way in this really important debate. I'm lucky enough to have Robinson's Brewery in my Hazel Grove constituency, a number of pubs, and the really excellent bottling and packaging plant on the Bredbury Industrial Estate. And they've been in touch with me about this issue because they already pay for commercial waste collection. They already pay for packaging recovery notes, and then the threat of EPR is going to cost them an additional £500,000. This is costly, but it's also really complex. Does my honourable friend agree with me? One of the concerns is the unnecessary complexity, and that's something that all should be looked at.
Well, I totally agree with her, and actually the continuation of the PRN scheme alongside the EPR scheme is one of those considerations. So we need to protect local businesses and high street businesses, and the lack of clear information about what the levy is going to be is really, really problematic. The price per tonne has been estimated at between £110 and £330 a tonne since September 2024. That's a huge variation, and businesses can't plan their cash flow, plan how much they need to accrue, without some certainty at least about the levy that's going to be introduced on a scheme that is already in place. So I urge the Minister to nail down that final amount as quickly as possible so that there is least certainty for managing this difficult situation. There's also an enormous amount of bureaucracy that comes into this, because calculating the amount of packaging when you have lost control as an importer of wine bottles, you sell those bottles to the on-trade and to the off-trade. You can make good assumptions about the off-trade where people have bought them as their for personal consumption, but you have no idea, essentially, what happens when it goes into the on-trade. So how do you realistically accrue? And some of the assumptions that DEFRA have made aren't helpful. They have assumed that because you can't prove somebody isn't taking a bottle of wine or beer home with them from the pub, you have to assume that that product is going to end up being recycled by the council. And that seems insane, really. Most pubs are paying huge amounts of money to get their waste recycled privately. They're not costing the council anything. But the producer, the importer of their product, is now having to charge them. So they'll be paying twice, and that's not sustainable for most local pubs. Small pubs, as has already been mentioned, are facing about £350 or more a year, medium-sized £750, and the larger ones £2,000 on top of their excessive business rates, as we've already heard. And I think it's important to remember that they can't absorb this in their tiny margins. So 85% of these costs are likely to be passed on to consumers anyway. So the idea that the producer pays is not going to work in this instance, because they can't change the packaging they use. The consumer will end up paying, and that's extremely problematic. It's about 5 to 7 pence on every bottle of beer, and it's around 15p on a bottle of wine, which might not seem like a great increase for a one-off purchase, but it's going to cost the industry or consumers an extra £154 million a year to buy bottled beer. That's quite considerable. It's crucial that businesses are going to be supported to transition to this scheme, because they're already struggling with the employers' national insurance hike, the business rate increase, and indeed for wine merchants, the changes to the way that duty is paid. So I call on the Minister to take a common sense approach to this. Considering an exemption of EPR for pubs would be sensible, as well as reconsidering the scope and timeline of implementation, because we're at risk of delivering a crippling blow to a drinks and hospitality industry, which is already struggling with huge headwinds. And in the little time I've got left, I just want to give you an example from a wine merchant, and you might wonder how I might know that information. The wine merchant in question has a turnover of £25 million and makes profits, and it's unusual in that it's quite profitable, of only £500,000 a year. That's a 5% profit margin. The EPR is estimated to cost them £272,000, more than 50% of their current profit margin. There's no way they can't pass this on to the pubs and the consumers that buy from them. The increase in national insurance will cost them £92,000. The ABV changes are going to cost them another £262,000. It's a highly profitable, successful business of enormous longevity, and unless it puts up prices and lays people off, there's no alternative for it. So I would urge the Minister to take these really serious concerns about the viability of businesses into account and reconsider the implementation of this tax.
To serve under your chairship, and I congratulate the honourable member for Rotherham for securing this debate. In the 10 months since I was elected MP for Ealing Southall, there is one issue that has been raised with me more than any other, and that is of litter and fly tipping. And it's why I have made it my business as an MP to campaign on this issue, and it's why I welcome the extended producer responsibility regulations we're discussing today. Now, it sounds complicated, as we've heard, but it actually means that the businesses who make the packaging that ends up on our streets and in our parks need to pay for that packaging to be recycled or disposed of. It's the principle of the polluter pays, and it makes complete sense to my constituents in Ealing Southall. Up to now, it's been local councils who've had to pay the full cost of getting rid of this rubbish, and that means it's actually local council taxpayers that foot the bill. This isn't fair, and I know my constituents will welcome the businesses who produce this packaging finally being forced to pay for it. They wonder when they buy a SIM card on the internet why it comes with so much plastic packaging and paper packaging. This new system means that businesses will face the extra costs for this, and it will give them a reason to reduce packaging.
This will take rubbish out of the system in the first place. And for my constituents, it will mean less cardboard and plastic strewn on our streets. It also means that Ealing Southall, I'd like to make a little bit more progress. It also means that Ealing Council will now get an extra £4.7 million this year from the levy. It sounds like a lot of money, but in fact it costs £30 million every year to collect and get rid of all of our rubbish. It's only right that the people who produce the rubbish should have to pay at least some of this massive cost. I will give way to the honourable member who raised first.
Thank you very much. Will the honourable member please assure her constituents that the whole sector supports EPR, but what's happening is, because of the 2-year lag, it means that there's going to be more plastic on her streets, not less.
I thank the honourable member for her intervention, and I'm afraid that the glass industry is perpetuating some of these untruths, and I think they just need to get on board with this. They constantly want to delay this. We need to make it happen now. Now, I know, as I say, the glass industry is saying that they don't support this, and they say that glass is more recyclable than other products. But tell that to my constituents who see glass bottles in black sack fly tips in parks and dropped in little piles by streets where people have been street drinking every day. In fact, just 43% of glass is recycled back into bottles. The glass industry also say that glass has been treated unfairly compared to plastic and cans, but plastic and cans will be included in the deposit return scheme, as we have already heard. Glass had the opportunity to be part of this, and they lobbied hard not to be included. Congratulations, they did a good job, but they can't get off scot-free. They're either part of the reverse vending machine plan or they're part of the polluter pays system we're talking about today. They have to be in one or the other. They create litter and they have to pay for the cost of clearing it up. Council taxpayers cannot be left to continue picking up the tab. The other thing the glass industry say is they're being charged more than they should because the fees are based on weight. As I've said, weight is important. As the heavier a product it is, the more it costs to transport for recycling. It's also breakable, which increases the cost further, and glass costs a lot more, both in money and in carbon, to recycle, as the heat has to be so high. Recycled glass bottles use 75% of the energy to make new bottles, compared to just 15% for reuse. So the charges in this plan are based on the estimated costs to councils of recycling glass, and this needs to be understood by the industry. Glass really does need to come up with a sustainable plan for reuse, rather than argue against the tide of the polluter pays principle. Now, I know the published fees are still draft, and precisely so the Minister and her department can ensure that they're fair and they're based on actual costs. Now, I have a lot of sympathy for the pub and restaurant businesses who might be affected, and I know the department is looking in detail at some of the points that have been raised. And I'm sure a sensible solution will be found. But it is important to emphasise that clean streets are also vital for pubs and restaurants who will not make money if no one wants to go to their mucky town centre. Now, the final argument from the industry is that they don't think the fees they pay will be spent on waste and recycling. I've heard this a lot. But already my local council in Ealing is making plans to spend some of the money on a crackdown on fly tipping. They'll be using CCTV by Southall Common and treating fly tipping as an environmental crime with police tape and cordon, based on work by Keep Britain Tidy. Ealing also have plans to open a new reuse centre in Acton. There are calls, as we have heard, from the glass industry to delay this polluter pays levy. But I would strongly urge the Minister to resist these calls. The previous government delayed taking action, and all this led to was rubbish in our streets increasing by over 1/3 on their watch. People in Ealing Southall want cleaner streets. They're sick to death of bottles and cans and cardboard and mattresses and sofas and all the rest of it, blighting their community. This government has already shown it is deadly serious about making local areas feel loved again. Let's get on with sorting out the mess and bring in this new law to clean up our streets. Thank you, Mr Stringer.
Will Foster.
Thank you, Mr Stringer. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I want to start by thanking the Honourable Lady, the member for Rotherham, for securing this really important debate for us to collectively put pressure on the government. Times are hard. Things cost more and people are genuinely unhappy, I'm afraid. What we don't want is to take away their beer or make it more expensive. The beer or pub sector in my constituency of Woking supports over 1,800 jobs and contributes 100 million to Woking's local economy. That's probably not surprising, as we're home to Asahi UK, a huge brand that covers Fuller's, Peroni and Cornish Orchards, just to name a few. Pubs are generally much more than just a business. They are hubs in our high streets. They're at the centre of our community life. Pubs are places where you go to watch a football match, where you take your grandparent to a Sunday afternoon to make sure they get out of the house. They're a fun place to drink pints with a few of your friends. Who has been to a pub during a funeral? I know I have, sharing stories about loved ones. I've done that at the Horsell Cricketers in my constituency. That's the core of what we're speaking about today, is that they're a really important place for people. And I'm worried the government rules will undermine that. Whether in grief or in happiness, the British pub is an integral institution and always been there for us, or we hope. The future of the pub is under threat. The government's poorly designed Extended Producer Responsibility Scheme, EPR, is a production tax in all but name. It places more than 100 million on new annual costs on brewers for glass packaging alone. The Liberal Democrats support the goal of making packaging and manufacturing more sustainable. We've long advocated for improved recycling and a well-designed deposit return scheme, but the current approach to EPR risks doing more harm than good. It heaps unpredictable and escalating costs onto producers, great and small, whether that be Asahi or the small brewer in my constituency, Thurston's, without offering clarity or stability that businesses need to plan for the future. For local brewers or publicans already battling inflation and higher taxes, these additional costs affect jobs and investment. Disastrously, this cost is also passed on to people going down the pub or buying a bottle of what they fancy from a shop. In Woking, this means a direct hit to ordinary people already struggling with the cost of living crisis. But colleagues, this issue extends beyond my constituency of Woking, what we've already heard from today. What's worse is this scheme is supposed to apply only to household waste, but it's currently designed, the way it's currently designed means that pubs are double charged. Despite already paying for commercial waste collection, they now face an additional £60 million burden across the sector, with some even larger venues expected to pay up to £2,000 extra each year. Even the government has acknowledged that this is a flaw, yet this won't be fixed until year 3 of the scheme. That delay is not acceptable. Why should a struggling local pubs in Woking, or other constituencies for that matter, be forced to bear unnecessary costs for the next 2 years whilst the government dithers? And it gets worse. The Office of Budget Responsibility has rightly classified EPR as a tax, and yet businesses still lack the basic clarity around the final fees, the reporting rules, or even if they'll be liable entirely. This uncertainty is paralysing for businesses when they're faced with international or local events that are already hurting them. How can small brewers or pubs make the investment decisions when they don't know what the rules of the game that they'll be playing? They don't know what the liabilities will be. The impact of EPR extends beyond hospitality. Let's talk about glass, as the member for Rotherham has. Over 60% of glass packaging in the UK is produced domestically, but the EPR scheme, as it stands, risks pushing manufacturers to abandon glass altogether in favour of cheaper, less sustainable materials, like, as our old classic friend, plastic. What we've seen in the United States is where similar schemes have driven glass manufacturers out altogether. In the UK, more than 6,000 people work in the glass sector. Penalising them is just the wrong thing to do. Therefore, I want to ask, I want to urge and I want to implore the Minister, please, will the government to commit to reviewing EPR to support the food and drink sector, especially in my constituency of Woking? The Liberal Democrats and I do support environmental initiatives, but not at the cost of local jobs, economic growth or the viability of businesses that hold our communities together. The government must rethink this scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Stringer. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, and can I thank my honourable friend, the member for Rotherham, for securing this important debate. And as the Member of Parliament for Burton and Uttoxeter, I'm proud to represent my hometown and the home of British brewing. As I've said many times in this House, Burton's brewery heritage stretches back centuries, and our iconic breweries are known the world over, not just for the quality of their beer, which I sample very regularly, but for the communities they support and the skilled jobs that they sustain. Brewing is in our blood. It shapes our local economy, our identity, and indeed the very character of our communities. So when policies come forward that could affect the future of this proud industry, we must pay close attention. Extended producer responsibility, or EPR, is one such policy. Now, the ambition behind EPR is a good one. We want to see more recycling, we want to see less waste and a greener future. But the way this policy is being introduced risks doing real harm to the very businesses that are already working very hard to do the right thing. I will give.
I'm very good. The right point, which is that nobody is against the principle. It's certainly not the aims that we're trying to achieve in terms of recycling. But it is having unintended consequences, and it's having those on a lot of small business, small brewers, small pubs, which have very tight overheads. And the actual cost of EPR, in some cases, is more than the total profit that's being made. That's why I hope the government will look at it again and come back with a revised scheme.
Yes, absolutely, and that's the point that I'm just going on to make, because under these current plans, brewers, particularly those using glass bottles, face over 150 million a year in new charges. That isn't just a minor adjustment. For some producers, it could be the difference between profit and loss, and this is already a sector under huge strain. And the impact doesn't just stop at brewery gates. Pubs, many of which already pay for their own commercial waste, will be charged again under EPR. That's a double payment for the same waste, adding up to £2,000 a year for larger venues. That's a flaw in the system, and while DEFRA has acknowledged this, the fix isn't expected for another 2 years. And in the meantime, pubs will foot the bill. And it will have a direct impact in my constituency, which has the most brewing jobs of any constituency in the UK, and home to companies like Punch, Green King, and brewers like Molson Coors and Marston's. This is going to stifle growth and investment at a time when that is the government's #1 mission. And there's also confusion over how EPR is being classified. The Office for Budget Responsibility calls it a tax, while DEFRA calls it a levy, and that lack of clarity really matters. Businesses in my constituency and around the country need that certainty to invest, to plan, to grow, and at the moment they don't have it. And perhaps most frustratingly of all is that, according to the government's own analysis, these changes might not even improve meaningful recycling rates. So we risk burdening brewers and pubs with new costs without a guarantee that it will actually deliver the environmental benefits that we want to see. Nobody's asking for the goals of EPR to be abandoned, but we do need to make sure that the system works for the environment, but also for British industry, for local jobs and for communities like mine that depend on them. Burton's brewers have survived wars, recessions and global pandemics. With the right support, they can continue to thrive, but they cannot and should not be asked to carry an unfair burden. Please, Minister, listen to the industry on this and let's work together to get this right.
We're running out of time. I'm going to reduce the time limit to 4 minutes. Jim Shannon.
Mr Chairman, a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and a special thanks to the Honourable Lady from Rotherham for setting the scene so very well. Champion by name, champion by nature. Well done. We're all aware of the need to be of good stewards of this planet, and for this reason we have set ourselves goals and targets that I support. The Honourable Lady has raised the practicality of the goals. It's not about that we don't agree with them. We all agree and accept the principles. How we achieve that in a way it doesn't impact upon the businesses that will feel the pain most. Also, a pleasure to see the Minister in her place. I think, Minister, you and I had some discussions with this, and I think it was a debate in the Chamber sometime just before Christmas. So these are things we've discussed in the past. In Northern Ireland, as is becoming the norm, we have different obligations as regards to recycling. The producer responsibility obligations 2023 amends the producer responsibility regulations of 2007 to update the glass remelt formula to increase the percentage by 3% to 75%. The percentage of glass packaging waste that producers should cycle by remelt. The thing is, we're all agreed on the need to have something. The Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive is included in Annex 2 of the Windsor Framework, which the Minister and I spoke about it when we were having them discussions in the Chamber. And this means that the directive will continue to apply in Northern Ireland following the UK's EU exit. It is currently anticipated that this will be the final year of the 2007 packaging waste regulations being enforced, with extended producer responsibility for packaging expected to be introduced in this year. So I would maybe just ask the Minister again, for the record, for this debate in Hansard, what discussions the Minister has had with the Northern Ireland. I know not the Minister has, by the way, but just for the correction of the Hansard, to have it on record, what discussions she's had with the Northern Ireland Assembly back home. Over the last 3 years, the targets for glass recycling has been stuck at 82%. And whilst our local councils are doing a grand job with curbside glass collection, this has changed the mindset. It's really important to change the mindset of myself, that all glass goes into that wee bit, that small bin in the back kitchen, and you take it down to the recycling, or you leave it at the end of the road for the council to collect. There is more that can be done in ensuring that packaging uses recycled products where possible and financially viable to do so. And I believe that this is something which the phase scheme is capable of achieving. The bottom lines that I have, and the bottom lines that the honourable gentleman had, and the honourable lady from North Shropshire had, is the additional obligations on the businesses are financially viable. And I do use that term lightly. I believe a business should not have to choose between reasonable profit and meeting these obligations. And whilst the phasing in of the scheme is given a taster, I would underline the concern of the metal, food packaging and glass industry associations. My understanding is the same as the Honourable Lady for North Shropshire, that the profit margin is as tight as can be. And if it is as tight as that, it won't take very much to throw over the line and find themselves in financial difficulties. So I thank the Honourable Lady for that introduction as well. The concern is that calculating the base fees based on the weight of packaging will put a disproportionate cost burden on the heavier materials and may cause a market distortion towards less environmentally friendly materials. And it would go against the very principle. So glass is one of those sectors. I understand government has indicated their willingness to assess this matter, and I'm looking to the Minister to provide assurance that this is and will remain the case. We must ensure that our businesses can produce at a price point that is attractive, and not have people considering importing due to the massive variation in cost, and understand that we have no control whatsoever over the recycling obligations of imports. We must meet the targets, but only by bringing businesses along with us and not leaving them behind, and not giving them financial obligations that we say will find hard to achieve. And I know that is a desire of the Minister and what to bring it forward, and will hopefully be the aim over the next number of years. Thank you.
Dr. Alison Gardner.
Thank you, Mr Stringer, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And I thank my honourable friend for Rotherham for raising such an important debate today. There are 51 pubs in my constituency of Stoke-on-Trent South alone, supporting 1,280 local jobs and contributing over 40 million to our local economy. But I have heard repeatedly from breweries and pubs in my constituency that the extended producer responsibility for packaging will have a substantial cost implication for these pubs, particularly so for the smaller pubs who struggle to absorb additional costs. Although the scheme covers household waste, most glass pub products are classified as household waste, and as such they are not exempt from EPR fees. Pubs are now facing a double whammy, paying EPR fees on top of the costs they already pay for waste collection and recycling through private contracts. And whilst I greatly welcome plans to amend this in coming years, in the meantime large pubs face on average costs of £2,000 per year. We know that brewers have slim profit margins already at roughly 2p per bottle, so the EPR levy or tax threatens to eliminate these margins, and I worry that consumers will pay the brunt. In fact, government's own analysis estimates that around 85% of EPR costs will be passed on to the consumers. For bottled beer, this could mean an extra 5 to 7 pence per bottle. My Jim will really be annoyed at that. We risk driving up the cost of food and drink in our local pubs, potentially deterring customers and weakening the competitiveness of our sector. Heineken supports several pubs in my constituency, including the Spotgate, the Black Lake Inn, where I had a nice meal on Sunday, the White Hart, the Swinnerton Arms, the Roebuck Inn and the Princess Royal. I've heard directly from them about the real impact that EPR fees are having on these businesses. And I do know that there is a plan to adjust EPR fees based on the environmental impact of packaging materials in 2 years' time. However, under the current fee structure, charging per tonne of packaging material Different packaging materials are charged at different prices, and often packaging materials with the best recycling record pay the most, which is particularly damaging for businesses like pubs that rely on glass packaging. And as a Stoke-on-Trent MP, it would be remiss of me not to mention the ongoing impact on the ceramics companies in my constituency. Heavy-duty packaging materials such as glass and steel, commonly used by ceramics manufacturers, attract higher EPR costs due to their weight. And the health of the ceramics industry relies on the glass industry. We cannot make glass without ceramics refractories. And if the glass industry is on its knees, this will have a knock-on effect on the ceramics manufacturers. While I appreciate that the implementation has already been delayed twice, I urge the Minister to rethink, or at least to provide a clear and fixed date with at least 1 year's notice. Businesses need this certainty to plan, invest and transition smoothly, without the disruption caused by shifting timelines. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Stringer. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship for the first time. I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Rotherham, for securing today's debate on extended producer responsibility for packaging, particularly in relation to glass, and for her frank and wide-ranging speech. I want to use my time to highlight also the significant and growing concerns within the hospitality sector, particularly our pubs. The principle behind EPR, ensuring that producers take responsibility for the packaging waste that they create, is one that has my full support. It is absolutely right that we strive to reduce waste, increase recycling and shift towards a more sustainable, circular economy. But in delivering these changes, we must also ensure that we don't unfairly burden working people or the businesses that serve our communities, especially when many of them are already doing their part. A truly circular economy means designing waste out of our systems, reusing valuable materials like glass, and in particular, glass, because it's one of the most recyclable materials that we have. And in the hospitality sector, it's been instrumental in supporting closed-loop recycling systems, not just recently, but for decades. The government has highlighted the development of the EPR policy since 2019, and I acknowledge the points raised in a written response to me from the Minister, which outlined the extensive consultations undertaken in 2019, 2021 and again in 2023 on the implementation of this legislation. It's clear that the government has engaged stakeholders, including glass manufacturers, to shape the policy and assess business impacts. But despite this consultation, concerns remain, particularly from those at the front line of hospitality, about the unintended consequences of this otherwise very positive step forward. I want to echo what's been said about the specific challenges they face and to ask whether the Minister will consider targeted adjustments that would maintain the integrity of the scheme whilst also ensuring fairness for businesses that are already contributing to recycling efforts. Specifically, the classification of glass packaging used in pubs as household waste, as has been said, is estimated to cost pubs £2,500 a year on top of other cost increases that they're already facing. That's despite them already managing their waste through commercial channels, often at a relatively high cost, which often rises above inflation. Pubs are assets to communities in Britain. They aren't just alcohol vendors. They're places for people to hold what might be the only conversation that they have that day. They're community centres, they're workplaces, they're incubators of the hospitality staff of tomorrow, and they're linchpins for many village economies. However, the British Pub and Beer Association, as has been said, estimates that double charging the EPR could inadvertently add between 5p and 7p to every bottle of beer sold in the UK. The risk here is that the producers of beer will be discouraged from using glass and gravitate towards alternatives, as we've said, like plastic, which, although lighter, don't offer the same level of recyclability. There is, therefore, a level of unfairness in the proposed EPR fees for pubs, which, as other honourable members have stated, will effectively pay twice for waste collection. And the fact that the OBR has defined the EPR as a tax, but DEFRA deems it a levy, has left pubs uncertain as to whether the costs will have to be absorbed by businesses or whether it will be passed on to their customers, something that could depress demand and make it even harder for businesses to plan for the future. We must get the implementation of EPR right, so that we can achieve environmental progress without putting an unfair burden on the very people and businesses who keep our communities going. Pubs, brewers and hospitality businesses are already doing their bit. I hope that the government will ensure their policies rightly reflect and reward that effort. Thank you.
Alex Mayer.
Thank you, Mr Stringer, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate my honourable friend for securing this debate, though I fear she's not going to agree with what I'm about to say. Glass is one of the most used materials in the world, and we've used it for thousands of years, and in fact even in ancient times glass making was viewed as mysterious and magical, and I think it is a really special product, and we use a lot of it in this country. But I think the extended producer responsibility is the right way to go. Because we're talking about recycling, reusing and reducing. There is a business in my constituency called EcoSip, run by a man called Alex Taylor. And he really is a supporter of the EPR scheme. I expect the Minister will be pleased that there is a business that does. He wrote to me and said, we are supporters of the EPR scheme. We believe it forces companies to take responsibility for the emissions and waste they create and provides incentives to decarbonise. And he is part of what is a UK-led green packaging revolution happening in Leighton Buzzard, but also across the east of England, Ipswich, for example, and right across our country. They are on a mission to decarbonise the drinks industry with lightweight, low-carbon packaging. I've been to EcoSip and I've seen the little packages that they put their wine into it, and each pouch uses just 2.5 grams of material. Their packaging is using 90% less CO2 than glass, and yet the wine inside of it tastes just as good. So I think that this is something that we need to take on board, not least because we're in the midst of a climate emergency.
Will the honourable member give way?
Absolutely.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and I just wanted to, thank you. I just wanted to also ask her if she was aware of Frugal Pack, who produce wine containers in Ipswich, I believe, and similarly are trying to wean us off reliance on glass and other unsustainable packaging and offer green jobs in this country.
Absolutely, yes, I am aware of Frugal Pack, Ipswich, east of England, where, you know, the east of England, the region that I'm from, absolutely leading the charge there. There are certain issues that some of these modern green manufacturing organisations face, and I would urge the Minister to talk to other departments as well, not least about the Weights and Measures Order 1988, which makes it illegal, I am told, to sell in this modern packaging at 125 millilitre portions, which is what your average person normally would order as a glass of wine. So I think there is stuff to be done, but luckily it's not a DEFRA thing to do. I think that there is always going to be a role for glass. You know, it looks pretty. There is a bottle of it here. I love my Bon Maman jars, and you know, you're never going to be able to use EcoSip to put a candle in and turn into a candlestick holder. But we have got to crack down on waste. We have got to boost recycling. I think the extended producer responsibility really is an important first step, not least, as we've heard, because it will also create 21,000 jobs and put a £10 billion investment into recycling, which is really welcome. So, in concluding, I would really urge the Minister not to bottle it and to make sure she goes full steam ahead.
Hear, hear.
We now move on to front bench spokespeople, starting with the Lib Dems, Sarah Dyke.
Thank you, Mr Stringer. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair and to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrats on this important issue. And I congratulate the Honourable Member for Rotherham for bringing forward this important debate today. It's right that the government is taking action to make manufacturing and packaging more sustainable. Recycling is essential for protecting natural resources and reducing the environmental impact of waste. But given that only 9% of plastic ever produced has been recycled, it has never been more urgent to make packaging more sustainable. The introduction of EPR can help us achieve this. But it's important that this does not come at the cost of business viability. Mr Stringer, the Liberal Democrats have real concerns that the current EPR scheme, as it stands, will put the financial stability of small and medium-sized businesses at risk.
Further uncertainty and instability for these businesses must be avoided, especially as they navigate the aftermath of the previous Conservative government's economic mismanagement, whilst they now try to find a way through the challenges being put in place on them by this current government. Now, I've spoken to representatives from the pub, beer and cider sectors who told me they are concerned, really concerned, about the impact EPR will have on their businesses. The drink sector in Glastonbury and Somerton supports 101 pubs and over 1,200 local jobs and contributes £29 million to the local economy. Profit margins for many of these businesses are paper thin, and they'll have no choice but to pass the additional costs they incur onto their customers. Now, this is backed up by DEFRA's own impact assessment, which confirms that 85% of the costs will indeed be passed on to consumers. While research from the British Beer and Pub Association has found that it could add £154 million a year extra in cost to beer bottles, negatively impacting many traditional beer and cider producing businesses who use glass bottles. The Society of Independent Brewers and Associates have noted that the implementation of the EPR in its current form will likely have a significant impact on small independent breweries, pubs and consumers. Of course I will.
And I should declare an interest as chair of the APPG for Scotch whisky. But she picked up about independent brewers there. Independent distilleries in North East Fife and elsewhere in Scotland are a real challenge because often they don't produce separate bottles for hospitality as well as for other consumers. Does she agree with me that this is something that the government need to look at in their consultation, because they're going to end up being totally taken into EPR, both on household waste and through hospitality?
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. She makes a really good point, and I think that indeed is the unintended consequences that we're going to be seeing if the scheme is rolled out in its current form. But I'm really worried about how it's going to impact the local independent pubs in my constituency, such as the Epsom Arms in Somerton, who pride themselves on celebrating brilliant local brewers. This comes at a time when the UK has already lost 100 small breweries in the past year alone, with many more facing costs that can't be absorbed by the businesses themselves. Mr Stringer, Glastonbury and Somerton is home to breweries such as Glastonbury Ales and Fine Tune Brewery, which is based near Somerton, as well as distilleries such as the Spirit of Glastonbury Gin Company. Now, I visited Fine Tune Brewery earlier this year to hear about some of the challenges that small breweries face, and they explained their concerns about the impact of the EPR will have on their business, and they just feel like they've been left in the dark due to poor communication from DEFRA. Now, it's clear that the knock-on costs from the EPR will impact on these businesses, as has been mentioned already here today. And in fact, many in the industry are concerned that beer and cider producers might now be incentivised to switch towards less costly packaging, such as aluminium or plastic. These materials are more difficult to recycle, unlike glass, so could risk some schemes achieving the opposite of its intentions. This potential backward shift in material usage may only be 2 years away when the deposit return scheme comes into force. In addition to these concerns, Mr Stringer, I've spoken to the people in the industry who say it's also clear that producers may end up paying twice for hospitality and business waste packaging under the current guidelines, and which has been replicated by the concerns of many members here today. Once for existing waste collection, and then again through EPR. So I hope the Minister will comment on this area of uncertainty and provide businesses with the clarity that they need on this matter. Mr Stringer, on Sunday, people across my wonderful county celebrated Somerset Day and the important traditions of the region. One such deep-seated tradition is cider making. It's an economically significant and indispensable part of Somerset's cultural fabric. Dasbury and Somerton is home to fantastic producers like Dowdings in Wincanton, King Brain Cider in Little Weston, Borough Hill Cider in Kingsbury Episcopi, Tricky Cider in Low Ham, Harry Cider in Long Sutton, Hex Cider in Street, and Beer Cider in Beer Alla, to name just a few. But Mr Stringer, cider makers are fully supportive of a circular economy, but many are worried about how these changes to the EPR sister scheme might make their businesses unviable. Many cider producers operate on thin profit margins, as I've said, and some may struggle to remain viable if they are laden with these additional costs. The National Association of Cider Makers have expressed frustration that the introduction of the EPR does not align with the introduction of the DRS in 2 years' time. So while the full costs of the EPR won't be confirmed until June, the hammer blow is already being felt as businesses have already been experiencing disruption since its introduction in April last month, making it very difficult for these businesses to plan effectively. So EPR, combined with other costs, are squeezing profitability and threatening employment. Given the economic importance of cider makers, be that to the people they employ or to the farms they have partnership with to grow the cider apples, it's a massive concern to many in Somerset that these additional costs could seriously damage the industry. When I held a very well-attended Cider Blossom cider tasting event in Parliament earlier this year, a cider maker remarked to me how cider is often seen as the drink that is synonymous with Britain, that its terroir is something that no other country can replicate as well as us. It's a unique industry, so the costs of EPR must be proportionate and producers must be supported towards a circular economy and not forced out of business. Now, Mr Stringer, the Liberal Democrats know how important it is that businesses are given the notice and the support and the time they need to be able to plan and adjust. The lack of clear information around the final fees and the timing of producer liability creates challenges for that business planning to happen. So again, I hope the Minister can give some clarity today on this matter. The Liberal Democrats believe it's crucial that businesses are supported in this transition, especially after they've already been hit by the employer national insurance contributions and higher business rates, as has been outlined by my colleagues today. Mr Stringer, the Liberal Democrats don't just have concerns over how the implementation of the EPR might impact small businesses, but also how the regulation of this scheme is going to happen. The Environment Agency is already severely underfunded and struggling to fulfil its regulatory obligations on water quality. So we are cautious to ensure this scheme comes with appropriate support and additional funding for the Environment Agency to reflect this additional responsibility. Likewise, given that this changes the way local authorities will be required to manage household recycling, we believe they must be supported in their role in this scheme properly, as they're dealing and being asked constantly to do more and more with less and less. The Liberal Democrats recognise the importance of making packaging more sustainable. This is why we have long been committed to introducing a deposit return scheme for food and drink bottles and containers. It's why we want to see the complete elimination of non-recyclable single-use plastics within 3 years, and we want to end plastic waste exports by 2030. But we are clear that these ambitions must come by working collaboratively with industry to ensure small drinks businesses are not left behind or struggling to remain viable. Because if we don't deal with this issue, less recyclable, less circular materials or cheaper imported glass with a higher carbon footprint will be a more viable option for businesses in the sector where margins are already very tight. Thank you.
Dr. Neil Hudson on behalf of the Conservative Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Stringer, and it's a great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Rotherham for securing this important debate today. and providing an opportunity to examine this matter further, and for contributions from colleagues across the House. Powerful contributions for the glass manufacturers, pubs, breweries and distilleries and businesses in their constituencies right across the country. As we've heard, pubs are an important part of our local communities and our social and family interactions in both happy and indeed sad times. We've had a number of pubs name-checked today. We've had a cider tour. I believe even Heineken was name-checked as well, which from memory I think refreshes the parts that other beers can't reach. But back to the member for Rotherham, a powerful speech advocating very strongly for that major manufacturer, Beats & Clark, in her constituency, and very importantly, the role that they play as well in producing the amber glass for medicines. We Conservatives have a proud record of environmental stewardship. Between 2010 and 2022, we successfully reduced the amount of waste going to landfill by 47% and cut the amount of biodegradable waste going to landfill by 46%. We also introduced a simpler recycling collection system to make it easier to recycle, saving people time and stopping confusion to boost recycling rates. Additionally, our introduction of the single-use plastic bag charge in 2015 has seen a remarkable 95% cut in sales in plastic bags in major supermarkets, significantly reducing plastic waste. We also passed the landmark Environment Act 2021 and have been able to set targets to tackle some of the biggest pressures facing our environment. This includes ensuring progress on clean air, clean and plentiful water, less waste and more sustainable use of our resources, a step change in tree planting, a better marine environment and a more diverse, resilient and healthy natural environment. In addition, the Act includes a new historic legally binding target to halt decline in species by 2030. However, we must acknowledge that the challenges still persist. Concerningly, household waste recycling rates have plateaued, with the latest published data in December 24 showing a decline from 44.6% in 2021 to 44.1%, a small reduction. However, there were some positives, notably a rise in packaging waste recycling from 62.4% in 2022 to 64.8% in 2023. The previous Conservative government laid the foundations for progress in recycling and enhancing the circular economy, which embraces the polluter pays principle to drive up recycling and improve resource efficiency. The Labour government has now attempted to take up this Conservative baton, but as ever, with their implementation, the devil is in the detail. Whilst further action is needed to drive up recycling rates, there are significant concerns that have been raised about the Extended Producer Responsibility Scheme in its current form. These include issues related to fee calculations, consistency across devolved nations, cross-border business implications, and the timing of the rollout of the scheme, given the new financial challenges that this government has bestowed upon businesses. While some aspects of the EPR scheme have come into effect, including data reporting, the fee element of the scheme is yet to be felt by businesses. For example, waste disposal fees, otherwise called waste management fees, which need to be paid for packaging that is classified as household, commonly binned packaging and glass household drinks containers, will be invoiced from October 2025. This invoice will be for fees for packaging placed on the market in 2024. In 2026, modulated fees and extension of waste disposal fees are scheduled to come into effect, which will add a financial incentive or penalty, taking into account the environmental impact and recyclability of specific packaging formats. Therefore, hard-to-recycle packaging may face a higher fee. Now, this debate today focuses on glass, and members will no doubt be aware of concerns that have been raised by the British Glass Federation about waste disposal fees. Whilst it is welcome that the government have clarified they're looking at the weight-based fees, there are concerns that glass will still significantly be impacted. And as has been raised today, there is much uncertainty about how the fees will be calculated and thereby penalising glass. The spirits industry is an important part of our UK economy. And there are many spirit businesses operating right across the UK. The UK Spirits Alliance has also raised concerns about the potential economic impact of these fees on the industry, which supports over 446,000 jobs and contributes £13 billion annually to the UK economy. Disproportionate treatment of glass could threaten this vital sector. I understand that DEFRA has suggested that 80% of the costs of the EPR will be passed on to the consumer. Now, small and medium-sized producers, including independent distillers, will face a difficult decision of absorbing the cost or passing it on. The British Beer and Pub Association estimates that EPR fees will add 5 to 7p per beer bottle, equating to £154 million in additional annual costs. Alarmingly, the Office for Budget Responsibility has warned that EPR is unlikely to have a material impact on recycling rates, which raises questions about the effectiveness of this in this iteration in achieving its environmental aims. With that in mind, I would be grateful if the Minister could clarify if they believe glass, which is 100% recyclable, should have higher or lower waste disposal fees than plastic or aluminium. Furthermore, could the Minister confirm what assessment has been made of the potential damage to the glass industry from the waste disposal fees, taking into account both economic cost and the impact on jobs? Is the Minister concerned that high waste disposal fees for glass may result in a shift in packaging to plastic, which may ultimately undermine the UK's environmental goals? Can the Minister also outline how the UK Government is working with the devolved nations to implement the EPR? What differences will there be nation to nation? And what impact will this have on businesses operating across borders? For example, how will the Scottish Government's decision to include glass in the DRS impact the rollout of England's EPR? It is so important that we have joined-up thinking and policy implementation across our United Kingdom in sectors that span our domestic borders. Additionally, can the Minister clarify if the Government has ambitions to expand the EPR scheme to any other industries, and if so, whether impact assessments will be carried out? In light of the OBR's assessment of the EPR, how will the Government seek to increase recycling rates? Now, earlier I mentioned the timing of the rollout of EPR, and I believe it's important to highlight how significant that timing is. This scheme, which imposes additional costs on businesses, is being introduced at a time in which the Labour government has caused significant uncertainty and pressure for businesses. The introduction of Labour's jobs tax, the increase in national insurance contribution payments means businesses now face an extra £900 in national insurance costs per employee. For many businesses, this may lead to job cuts, wage freezes, investment put on hold, and sadly, in some cases, businesses being shut down. If a business is able to survive, it is likely that these additional costs will be passed on to consumers. Given this context, it is only right that we consider whether it is appropriate to be adding further costs on businesses, however commendable the aim. We, His Majesty's most loyal opposition, will continue to scrutinise these developments closely and ensure that the concerns of businesses and consumers are not ignored while we still protect our precious environment.
Thank you. Minister, just before I call you, can I ask you to try and give a short time for the proposer to wind up at the end of it? Minister.
I'm grateful to you, Mr Stringer, for that guidance, because I didn't do that last week, so clearly the clerks have made a mark against my name, so I'm going to do my best, and I've got my team on standby to sort of yank me down, but I'm sure you will as well. So thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today. And can I thank my honourable friend for asking for this debate? She has been a doughty supporter of Beats and Clark and in her constituency in Rotherham, and for the glass industry in general. And I also thank honourable members from across the House who've made really valuable points today. Let me begin by setting out what these reforms are trying to do. We are trying to turn ourselves into a more circular, more resource-efficient economy. These reforms are the biggest reforms in a generation, and the three different elements, simpler recycling, DRS and PEPR, are going to turn the dial on those stagnating recycling rates, which, as the Honourable Gentleman for Epping Forest said, stagnated basically over the last 15 years and are bumping along at 42 to 44%, and to get our household recycling rates up to 65% over the next 10 years. In the process of doing that, the assessments are that this will drive £10 billion of new investment into the British economy and create 21,000 1,000 new jobs. I'm going to make some progress and then I'll give way. UK circular industries, which keep products and materials in circulation for as long as possible, currently deliver £67 billion a year to the economy, up from £44 billion in 2008, and they provide 827,000 jobs. And my honourable friend for Leighton Buzzard and Dunstable talked about the innovators in her constituency creating these new packaging. I will take away the weights and measures stuff, and we will see what we can do on a cross-ministerial way. I'm going to give you some time at the end, but I want to make a bit of progress. So the annual growth rate of circular industries is at 3%, more than double the UK's overall growth rate of 1.2%. So extended producer responsibility moves recycling costs from taxpayers to packaging producers. Now think about it, not everybody drinks, not everybody shops online, but we're all paying for the costs of that collection. And we've had a great tour around the drinking places and the hostelries and the amazing producers that we have. But at the moment, everybody in the country, through their tax, through council tax and general taxation, is paying for that. These reforms are creating systematic change, and that is hard. Simpler recycling in England will make recycling easier and consistent, and people will be able to recycle the same materials, including glass, whether they're at home, work or school. This will create a step change in the quality and quantity of recycled material, recycled streams, and this is enabled by PEPR, which will pay for the new costs associated with this change, as my honourable friend for Ealing Southall has mentioned. We're also introducing deposit return schemes across England, Northern Ireland and Scotland that add refundable deposit to single-use plastic, steel and aluminium containers. I have discussed this with my colleague in Northern Ireland, literally last week at Kew Gardens, where in the British-Irish Interministerial Council we had a 2-hour debate around how we're going to cooperate on the circular economy, and in particular looking at the challenges of Guernsey, Jersey, Isle of Man, island economies with no real reprocessing facilities, and what we can all learn from each other. These schemes, DRSs, I'm going to make some headway. They cut litter, boost recycling rates to over 90% and create high-quality materials that industry can reuse. And in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, since it launched in February 2024, the Republic of Ireland's DRS has seen over 1 billion containers returned, a near 50% reduction in drinks container litter. And last week, I met with Timmy Dooley, Minister of State for Environment and Climate, and he said he was sceptical about DRS, but he actually now has the zeal of the convert. This challenge is changing the way that retailers and producers are thinking about eco-design. Walkers is starting to use paper-based packaging for crisp multi-packs. Many supermarkets are now using paper, not plastic trays for fresh food. And our vision is to become world leaders in circular design, technology and industry. These reforms were started by Michael Gove, late of this parish, back in 2018, so 7 years ago. And I remember successive Secretaries of State for DEFRA coming to my, when I was the chair of the Environmental Audit Committee, and promising these reforms and deposit return scheme. This PEPR has been subject to extensive engagement and consultation with business, including public consultations in 2019 and 2021, so businesses had a clear indication, and it has already been delayed twice. My officials also run monthly packaging engagement forums that regularly draw over 1,000 attendees, providing updates and testing policy development with stakeholders. I've met with British Glass several times to hear their concerns. I met with Heineken last September. I met British Glass in October 2024, then at the Glass Reuse Roundtable hosted by the British Beer and Pub Association in January at the Budweiser Brewing Group. On the 11th of February, Minister Jones, Minister of State at the Department for Energy at DESNES, joined me to discuss the glass sector. So we have engaged on this. The glass sector lobbied extensively to be excluded from the deposit return scheme. We respected their position and kept this approach during the final passage of the DRS and PEPR legislation, which, and PEPR was supported by all sides of the House. Sadly, DRS wasn't. My officials have talked with businesses that make and use glass packaging. We've listened to feedback to make sure the fees are set fairly, and I'm very aware of the issues the glass sector has raised about dual-use items. This is items that can be disposed of in either business or household waste streams. It has been difficult to find an answer that works for everyone, and because of the issues raised in this debate, I have asked my officials to consult with industry immediately to find the fairest solution. We're going to also, there's been a lot of talk about small businesses. Many international PEPR schemes offer no exemption for small business. We responded to UK small business concerns by putting in place some of the most generous exemptions of any scheme globally. Exemptions mean that businesses with turnover below £2 million or placing less than 50 tonnes of packaging on the market are not obligated for fees, and that applies, those exemptions apply to approximately 70% of UK businesses supplying packaging in the UK. There are quarterly payment options to help with cash flow for larger businesses, and we will watch those de minimis thresholds carefully, because if we raise those thresholds, that puts costs onto the remaining businesses, as local authority collection costs remain the same. PEPR fees for glass are lower than aluminium and plastic because packaging is heavier. It costs more to handle per unit than some other materials. And we've worked closely with industry and local authority to make sure the costs used to set producer fees accurately reflect the on-the-ground waste management operation costs that currently every taxpayer is having to pay. Weight is a driving factor in waste management, and it's the most common common approach used to determine costs for public and private sector collection. That's why it's central to our approach. But the scheme relies on all producers paying their fair share. So we announced in December, as the Honourable Lady said, there was a range and there was unhappiness, and so we set a set point in December of £240 per tonne. The fewer free riders there are in the system, let me finish my point, I haven't made it yet. The fewer that do not report and pay on their packaging, the lower fees will be for everybody. And this was raised by my honourable friend in previous debates. Some people don't report their packaging. I've instructed my officials to work with regulators, and we've done a sprint on that. And we've brought into, we've tracked down about 1,800 suspected free riders, with just now 200, a little over 200 companies under review. And I pay tribute to the Environment Agency officials up in Sheffield who've done that, and I pay tribute to agency officials and the Met Police last week, who arrested 2 individuals in London for export packaging fraud and suspected money laundering. But we're going to keep this under review. This work is having a real impact, and we're going to publish those year 1 base fees in June, and I'm optimistic the result will be an improved picture. I'm very happy to give way, first of all, to the, well, maybe over there, and then to the Honourable Lady, if people still have questions.
For allowing the intervention. I think businesses really need to know what that rate's going to be as soon as possible. The financial year has already started. They have very little headroom in their cash flows. They need to be able to plan. Can she commit to giving us that number as soon as possible?
That number will be published by the end of June, and businesses are aware of that timescale. I can make a tiny bit more progress, but I don't want to use up all the response time. Okay, yeah.
Just want to very quickly raise that there are wider issues with EPR if we talk about innovative companies providing new types of packaging. Woolcool provides a wool-based packaging which is compostable and biodegradable, but it's classed as worse than polystyrene because it's so innovative, it's classed as unclassified. And would the Minister agree to looking into this for me?
There's all sorts of... I will look into that. I know wool is used in certain... packaging situations, and it's in a way it's sort of too small to sort of register, but we will have a look at all of these innovative ideas and how we keep things in circulation for as long as possible. The Honourable Member for Burton mentioned the many pubs, including, and did he mention Green King?
I did.
He did. But Green King in Bury St Edmunds has already started using reusable glass bottles in 65 pubs that are served by their Runcorn depot, and they've collected over 500,000 bottles since January. I'm going to sit down, but I do reassure honourable members I'm very alive to the issues, and we hope to make further progress.
I decided not to intervene on the Minister because we've had this argument a lot, and the Minister still doesn't seem to be hearing, to a whole room of MPs bringing examples to her. The Minister talks about all producers paying their fair share. I agree. The glass sector agrees, but that is not happening right now because it is only glass that is paying, and the freeloaders the Minister talks about are currently plastic and aluminium. I'm really supportive of all of the other examples of packaging. Absolutely, let's have all of them. But at the moment, the Minister has a stark choice. She mentions the jobs that this is going to be created. She does not mention the jobs that are going to be lost. And it is those jobs and the likelihood of losing the glass industry that I urge the Minister to focus on. Pause the scheme, listen and act on the concerns, and bring the whole scheme in force in October 2027, when the other two key materials are going to be in place. That is the only fair and just and, dare I say, Labour way of doing this, because at the moment the good guys are being punished and people in our constituencies are going to lose their jobs.
The question is that this House has considered the impact of extended producer responsibility for packaging on glass packaging producers. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting is suspended until 4:30.